So my electric power steering showed up. I got it from epowersteering.com. It's the kit specifically for Miata. Comes with everything, just simple bolt-on, which is nice. So it's got the motor itself, the controller, potentiometer for sensitivity, the main power harness and everything. Everything's really nicely loomed together, heat shrink. Then it has the pieces needed to put it into the car. So this goes on the firewall, cut down column, and then just a little adapter piece to finish off the length. I'll show you how that all goes together. It has a fuse for the fuse holder, a little 3D printed plug to go into one of the factory switches, like for example the cruise control switch on a car that doesn't have it, and that will hold the potentiometer. The little bolts to bolt it together, and of course a sticker and manual. So I'm going to go ahead and start pulling the car apart and get ready to put this in. So taking apart the factory column is pretty simple. Mine will look a little different because it's already kind of modified, and you'll see up under here there's next to nothing for wiring in the way. The factory car has all its computer and everything up in here. Mine's relatively empty. You'll also see I already have my ignition torn apart, but otherwise the steps are the same. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on that. First thing to do will be to pop the steering wheel off. So there's these little covers that hide a couple 10 mils, one on each side. Pop the gauge hood off. It just unclips. You kind of grab it in the right spot. Pop the top piece off here, and then some Phillips under here. Now this is where mine will start to look a little bit different than everybody else's, just because mine's fully rewired and everything. But essentially, to take the clock spring off and the ignition, on a factory one there'd be knockout bolts there. You use a punch to thread those, but I already have mine replaced with a couple Allen head screws, so I'll pull those out. Then this comes off, slides right out. The ignition can be a little tricky. Might have to fiddle with the key a little bit if you still have one and everything. Then of course, just some wiring to take off. Again, mine is redone, so it looks different, but you'll have some connectors on here, even on a factory one. Mine's pretty simple. I don't have too much wiring in the way, but essentially the next thing to do will be to take out those 12 mils. That'll drop the column off of the dash bar. And then back in here, there's some, I believe they're 12s as well, up on the firewall, as well as, I believe it's a 10 on that one factory U-joint before the bearing at the firewall. So we'll go ahead and take all that apart. So now that the old column is out of there and everything's ready to go back together, we will prep the new power steering unit to go in. So again, my wiring is different, so I'm going to actually put my wiring right into this main block I have here for the power and ground, rather than run it all over to the battery. But normally you would have enough wire to run it right through the center console, through to the back, put it right to the battery, untouched. I'm going to cut my wiring up a bit. That doesn't apply to everyone. So in terms of assembling this and getting it ready to install, all you really need to do is put the column piece on the motor, and then that little shaft section with the spline on the other side of the motor. So you'll see there's this opening here, and at some point there's the set screw. So you'll want the set screw visible through the hole when you put it on the spline of the motor. So when you bolt it down, you can then tighten the set screw. In terms of bolting them together, it's just simply this 3-bolt pattern onto this 3-bolt pattern. And the way you want it oriented is with the flat plate that bolts up into the dash bar, this upwards, and the motor itself extending to, well, to the right, so towards the heater box. And you can see the bolt pattern is already predetermined. You just simply have to make sure you assemble it correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and get the set screw loose end, slide that on there, and tighten that together.
So you have the bolts tell you what size they are? Said 10? Yeah. They're about to fit in there or no? I might just need a wrench. Did you make sure the camera's in normal? No. It has been though, right? Yeah, you best check. Or else I have to put the whole car back together and start over.
So for this little piece, it is as simple as loosening off the set screw that has the jam nut on it, sliding it onto the spline, line it up with that recessed part, and tighten down the set screw. So when it's finger tight, you can always give it a wiggle to make sure it's in the lowest part of that recess. And then go ahead and snug that up and tighten the jam nut. All right. So I'm getting ready to do the wiring portion, so I am going to go ahead and use the piece they supply. Essentially what you need to do is take two little screws out of the back of the potentiometer box, put it through, and then it just replaces the other plain box that it was packaged in. So just a simple two screws, poke it through the hole, then you can use the nut to tighten it up, and this will clip into the factory. In my case, it's going to be the dimmer for the factory gauges and whatnot is where it's going to clip into. So I have the wiring rigged in. I have the power and ground from this hooked into a switched power down in there, which is different from most people. They would use that inline fuse holder. Then I have the heavy power and ground run up into here to plug into the side of the controller, and then all this other stuff is just my other wiring. So this one's waiting to be plugged into the controller as well. It comes off of the potentiometer, and of course you can cut this down shorter and put the knob on lower. I just want to make sure that I'm comfortable with where it is before I cut it, just to make sure if I'm wearing my race gloves I can still reach it. But it popped right into there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the column and install it. So at first I wasn't gonna, but I ended up in the end mounting the box to the column and then tucking all the wiring in there. I was gonna put the box to the side, hence why you didn't see me install it with the box. But essentially all you do is you mount the box in with one of the 10 mils that attach the column to the motor. So it's pretty simple. It'll probably be easier in the long run, so I just went ahead and did it. So first things first will be to put that bracket in there that has the bearing, and then we will try to get the spline lined up into the U-joint, get the bolt going, and go from there. It might be easier to put the bolts up here loosely while you're trying to mess with the U-joint, but I guess we'll see. So this bracket that now just has a needle bearing in it, instead of being attached to the column, goes on the existing studs that are there. I believe I'll be able to get everything lined up, but I might leave it loose for now. Being who I am, I didn't read instructions, so I'm just winging it. So it seems like it might be easier to put the bracket on the column first. This is going to be kind of hard to show, but essentially with the bracket over the end of the column, get the spline into the U-joint, put the bolt back in. Then you just simply lift it up to meet the top. So that's how I'm going to try to do it. It would have helped if I went ahead and did this while I had the dashboard out of my car, but I didn't. Just had to find the right angle. So you can probably kind of see the spline is in the U-joint, the bolt is through, the bracket's loose. Then we just have to tighten that bolt that clamps the U-joint, get the ears on the bearing support up onto the studs, then lift the motor up to the dash bar. Easy as that. I will note that some people have to worry about lining up the ignition, just the little gap on the spline. It's not very hard to do. I just don't have to care about that because I don't have proper ignition switch anymore. So I didn't realize this at first with the box there, it will hit that kick plate. So I will likely just quickly investigate putting that box flipped orientation. I just didn't want it too close to my feet at first. So I'm just gonna pull it out quick, flip that around. So I just flipped the computer around on the bracket just to have it a bit lower. I was wanting to keep it up a bit higher, but there's still plenty of room down here, so no issues there. Now we just have to put our switches back together for the clock spring and everything. The ignition, you'd want to make sure the little slot lined up if you still had the normal like key lock out. I don't, so I don't really have to care about that. And then we'll put the steering wheel back on and button everything up. So you can see with everything back together, the box is just barely lower than the kick plate, but lots of room between it and the pedal. The motor's up in there. You can see maybe. And of course, everything's tight at the firewall. The dust shield's back on the U-joint. I haven't trimmed the potentiometer yet, but I will. But it's time to test it. So with the key on, it feels a little stiff with it all the way down. Bear in mind, my car is not on the ground, so it's easy no matter what. And then when you turn it up all the way, it's super easy. You can see it kind of freewheel versus down all the way. It's stiff and just stops. But we won't really know how good it works until the car's on the ground. There's a little bit of a delay between adjustments. Like if you're all the way down, which is essentially off, it'll take just a second to, there it goes, to get easy. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see what it's going to feel like once it's on the ground, because with these sticky 275s, it is pretty hard to turn. So I have the interior back together. Everything is mounted and finished up. I trimmed back the potentiometer, and so right now it's off, and you can kind of see it takes a bit of force to turn it. Once you turn it on, give it a sec to energize. Even in its lowest setting, you can see I can turn it with one finger, but still stiff. And then once you turn it all the way up, so with the range, turn it down a bit, it gets a bit stiffer. So super modular. And because I was wondering this and I didn't find any answers, there's no real play. Like there's no notable clunk or anything in the actuation. It is very smooth. It feels like hydraulic steering. It doesn't feel like how some people worry with the electric that you'll actually notice it in there. So I'm very happy with it, and I think it'll be a great improvement for putting this on track.